Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Is it better, safer, or smarter to back into a parking space? Welcome to First Coast Connect. I'm Ann Schindler. Today, reverse psychology. Why the debate over back-in versus pull-in parking has become the subject of controversy, internet currency, and in some places, urban policy. Later in the program, a new report finds state health officials stopped releasing information about pregnancy-related deaths for years following Florida's near-total abortion ban. But first, any new driver or holiday shopper can attest to the fact that parking a car involves some tense moments. But that tension has ramped up over a debate about what direction you're parking your car. Here to walk us through the vehicular divide, we're joined by Fred Jones. He's an urban planner with the Haskell Company and a member of the Downtown Development Review Board. Fred, welcome back to First Coast Connect.
Oh, good morning, Ann. Pleasure to be here.
It's a delight to have you. So first of all, Fred, let's start with the basics. Which are you? Are you a pull-in parker or a back-in parker?
Well, I think probably more of a pull-in parker because there's just not a lot of that back-in option available in a lot of places. And I think that's probably part of the challenge. But occasionally I've been known to back in. But, you want to get people's blood boiling, back into parking. It's very controversial.
You talk about how there's not a lot of back-in parking available. And I want to get to a little bit in a bit what is more convenient back-in parking. A lot of the parking that we face, though, is, to your point, 90-degree parking in a regular parking lot, and it requires a little bit of maneuvering. It's been getting a lot of attention lately. We mentioned there have been articles just in the last couple of weeks in the New York Times and USA Today. People are posting on social media, including one influencer on Instagram who goes by the handle Oh So Lucius. Let's take a listen to his post about this.
While I'm sitting here waiting to get into the parking spot that's beside you, now I got to sit here and wait while you maneuver, you pull out, you pull in, you pull out, you pull in. It would be different if it was just a smooth transition, just like pulling in. I pull into every parking spot. It's a simple transition. Then when it's time to back out, I back out. What happened to you guys in your past to where you have this trauma to where you just got to make it difficult and you got to back it in? You got to back the car in. Who you running from?
So a funny post, it got a lot of response, and clearly it's a question a lot of people have. What is the rationale for people who say that they are backing into a parking spot in a traditional shopping center parking lot?
Yeah. Well, the most common thing is really just about safety because obviously when you back in, and it takes a little bit of maneuvering to do that. When you exit, it's a lot safer because your visibility is increased. You can see what's coming before you. So you're either going to get the confusion when you pull in and back out on the back end of things as you back out, no pun intended, or when you're exiting the vehicle. And it's really interesting because a lot of insurance providers, even the Insurance Institute of Highway Safety, has recommended back-in angle parking. It's a safer maneuver for folks to actually pull out, and they have increased visibility and they can see. So it's a preference thing, but it's certainly a lot safer, especially as vehicles have gotten larger. Now, of course, we have cameras and those things and the like, but I think it's more of an issue of safety when you're exiting the vehicle for folks. That's usually the typical rationale.
So there are some cities that have made back-in parking their standard, and they're all over the country. There's Salt Lake City, San Francisco, but there's also Charlotte, Wilmington, Philadelphia. So there are cities that have looked at this. It's something that you, even in your earlier iteration as a commissioner, looked at the beaches, something that the beaches communities were considering. It is something that hasn't always taken off, and it didn't at that time. What happened?
I think it's a lot to do with sort of, I think I couch it more as a cultural issue, and there's a lot of just resistance on behalf of elected leaders to do things just because they think, hey, this is a confusing issue, or maybe they've taken the step of like, hey, we're going to now price the on-street parking that's adjacent to our downtown. A lot of this has to do with economic development and business improvement and things. And so obviously you get more, particularly if you angle the spaces, you get more spaces than you would with parallel
I've seen
spots.
that you get as much as 25% more parking if they're angled. Okay.
So that's usually the first step is like, hey, we're going to convert this maybe parallel parking to an angle parking. because it's going to help the businesses, it's going to create turnover and the like. And then when you go the step further to allow back in, usually it's a much more intentional thought about safety. And it's the idea that we're going to improve traffic calming because naturally you're going to have to slow down to make that maneuver. You're going to back in. The benefits are too, when you open the door, it orients the passengers to the curb side. So especially if you have children, they don't come out into the street. And then also, I think just from the businesses, you can do loading and unloading from the sidewalk. So from that standpoint, it's certainly much more of a safer thing. And then obviously as people leave, they have visibility. They can see directly the cars in front of them and they can exit smoothly. But I think the challenge that we face is just that of the resistance to sort of move to that space because of the maneuvers that are involved, or people are going to be confused, or there's just a fear that like this is going to create utter chaos if we implement this.
So when you first started mentioning to me back in angled parking,
Mm-hmm.
it struck me as something that I had not seen before. Is we said a lot of cities have implemented it. And the initial reaction to your point, I think a lot of people are like, well, that would create all kinds of confusion, right? You have to kind of go forward past the spot,
Mm-hmm.
then you have to back into the spot. But as you observe, once you compare it to something that is a little more traditional, like parallel parking, it might actually involve fewer maneuvers and less issue in terms of traffic congestion.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
talk about that.
exactly. I think obviously the parallel parking in essence it takes about 4 different maneuvers. You've got to move up, and then you sort of have to back in, and then sometimes you got to pull the car forward. It's certainly much more common in urban areas like in the Northeast, where I think you have to do parallel parking to even have a license. I don't know if you have to do that in Florida anymore. But whereas the back and angle parking, particularly if the spots are oriented at maybe like 60 degrees, it gives you a little bit more room. You just pull forward and you back in and make sure you have the clearance. And usually that's 2 or 3 maneuvers. So it is less complex. It's just a matter, I think, again, it just boils down to the fact that I think there's this perceived confusion around it because it's not an intuitive thing that you often see, and it hasn't been adopted widespread. Like I say, probably about 20, 25 years ago, this became sort of the nouveau thing. I think there were a lot of transportation planners that thought this is going to be the new standard. And I just think it never really took off. I mean, a few select places have done it to gain more parking spaces, to improve traffic calming and safety and economic development. But again, it's just had a lot of people that have been resistant to doing that.
Technology has changed, which makes all of this a little bit less complicated. Since 2018, backup cameras have been required on vehicles, and many of them also have warning systems that let you know if you're nearing a cyclist or a pedestrian. At the same time, parking lots in particular and parking is associated with a lot of pedestrian accidents. As much as 20% of all accidents that involve pedestrians happen in some sort of parking situation. And so those new technologies are not foolproof or fail-safe. So the push to move towards back-in parking is not just something that's happening in an isolated sense, people who are doing it now. There are recommendations that have been coming out, including from AAA, that appear to be driving some of this push to get people to do back-in parking. They think it's safer.
Yeah, totally. I think there's so many benefits, and the places that have done it remarkably have seen most of their accidents, in particular in their urban places, go to zero from this, or at least severe accidents from this. And I think as vehicles have gotten so much larger, with the reduction in the fuel economy standards and the things, I mean, if you compare like an F-150 today of 20 years ago, it's probably twice as big. So vehicles have gotten larger. To your point, the technology's not foolproof. And just from an insurance standpoint, they recognize that there's clear safety benefits to being able to, once you back in and you have all of this visibility of the oncoming traffic that's approaching, you can exit clear. And again, I think also just that standpoint of being able to orient people to the sidewalk is really huge. I mean, you open the door, kids may spill out into the roadway, you're out there. There's also the issue with parallel parking. You have the vehicle, when the door opens, especially if there's a bicycle lane next to it, you have the tendency to clip the cyclist. So there's just a lot of safety benefits. And I think the industry is recognizing that this could be something that we should look at.
If you're just joining us, we're talking to urban planner Fred Jones about the debate over pull-in versus back-in parking. You can join the conversation on air by calling 904-549-2937, or you can go to firstcoastconnect.org to find all the ways you can connect with us. This is something that we have asked our viewers and readers online to weigh in on, and we did get a number of comments, Fred. One saying, I back in all the time. There is no traffic backing up into a spot. Almost always there's traffic backing out of a spot. It's just plain safer, especially if you live or park on a busy street. I want to ask you about the location because you as an urban planner are focusing a lot on street parking and if it's happening in that kind of urban setting or this versus parallel parking. But obviously a lot of the parking that we do happens in parking garages and in parking lots. Does the rationale change for you at all in those circumstances?
I think a lot of that is just, a lot of these lots we're doing 90 degree to be able to maximize as many spaces as possible. So that's usually the rationale in terms of how they design an off-street parking lot, like in front of a.
Does it fit more if you're talking about a lot to do them because we were saying that you can actually get more spaces angled if you're talking about an urban street setting.
In an urban street setting, certainly much more spaces having it angled along the street section. Of course, it does require a little bit more pavement or right of way.
But you're saying compared to parallel
compared to parallel or even compared to the parking that's in a lot. So, for example, in a shopping center, where a lot of this frustration is like the off-street parking, where people are pulling in a driveway aisle and there's somebody backing into a 90-degree space, and you're sort of annoyed because it's taking so long and you're not able to get to your spot. So I think from that standpoint, it does generate a little bit more frustration and confusion, particularly on those 90-degree spots where people are just accustomed to kind of pulling in. So I think it's more of just sort of a courtesy thing, an impatience thing more than anything else when you're going in, hey, we pull into these spots. And instead of backing in, and you'll see the person backing in and you get frustrated. And I think that's really what that gentleman was alluding to. Versus in a downtown section.
Right. We've got a call from Adam in St. John's. Good morning, Adam. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning, guys. I figured I'd chime in on this conversation. I recently purchased a full-size truck that has a much wider turning radius than my previous vehicle, and I have to back into many parking spots because if I pull in straight, it's almost physically impossible to pull the truck out because only the front wheels will turn. So I just wanted to bring that up. It's one thing if you have a small car, but for much larger vehicles, especially full-size trucks, backing in may be the only option.
Very interesting, Adam. Yeah, that's something I hadn't really thought about, but certainly it does make it a lot harder when you're dealing with something that's got that much more capacity. There's some people that point out, well, you're going to be backing up one way or the other. Why would it be safer to, say, back into a space versus backing into a line of traffic? And I guess the explanation there is mostly you're going to find pedestrians in that lane of traffic versus in the spaces themselves.
Yeah, no, exactly. And there's just a lot of, I think at the end, the benefits in terms of visibility, the benefits in terms of cyclists moving through an area, the benefits of orienting folks to the sidewalk. A lot of the, like I say, the reticence around this, I think, is just more of just we don't do it a whole lot. So it's just kind of over, it's just pushing through to the other side to institutionalize this a little bit more. I think the more places that we have this, the more adherence we get to it, and particularly to the previous caller, the large vehicles make it more suitable to do that maneuver.
All right. We've got a call from Janet in St. Augustine. Good morning, Janet. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning. I'm a former Girl Scout leader, and I don't know if it was a rule that we had that we must back in if we were like on a camping trip or, some sort of trip with the girls. And the reasoning was if there's an emergency, you don't have to think about backing out. You just pull straight out and get on your way. So I always back in. It's just easier. I'm already in the mode of driving. And like when you get up early in the morning to go to work, you might not really be, in full gear for driving, and you back up over your kid's bicycle or
Yeah.
something, you know. So it's just much easier for me to back in everywhere I go. However, it's very frustrating when I'm in the move of backing in and somebody swoops in and gets that parking spot.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you're kind of pulling ahead past a spot and then backing in, Fred, you open up the Seinfeld possibility, right?
know,
That you're
yeah.
going to be stuck, battling for a spot.
Yeah.
Some people call it tactical parking. I have seen that where people are backing in and they're saying, well, you are ready to make a departure with ease, perhaps faster. But I've also seen where there's some places, power plants or something where people really are working in kind of a safety first circumstance where there could be an evacuation or there could be something, and they actually are instructed to park that way for that reason.
Yes. I think a lot of this, it boils down to safety, and the more that you can, again, if you can eliminate a lot of this stuff too, like if we can eliminate fender benders and things of that nature, just, any kind of incident, the better. So the more that, like I say, once you've back a vehicle and you park it, if you're exiting, it's just shown that you're going to really eliminate a lot of these preventable accidents and injuries. It's just getting to that point, as I said, is the challenge.
Well, we reached out to the city of Jacksonville about this just to see if it was something that the city was looking into or considering. And we got this response. They said, we checked with traffic engineering on this. Back-in angled parking has been considered regarding on-street parking spaces in the past. And the concern was that people would not understand the requirements to back in and we would get low compliance from motorists. But they also added that there's an element of the ordinance code that specifically mentions it, stating that it's unlawful for vehicles to be backed or positioned in a parking space, preventing a license plate from being seen from the driving lane. And so Florida's a one-plate state, along with another 20 other states in the country. And this applies to city parking. So if you're in a city-owned parking lot or you're in a city-metered spot, that city law essentially requires that you have your plate visible. And so that is something that would seem to be kind of a prohibitive rule when it comes to implementing this.
Yes, exactly. And, taking it a step further, not only from just a safety and a law enforcement perspective, from a price parking perspective, some of the newer technologies, when they actually, you end up having like a pay by plate type of scenario. You may actually have these scanners. There's a person, I know the beaches started implementing that in the town center, where there's a person that drives around in a golf cart and it scans the license plate to make sure, hey, are you still within the allotted time that you've paid for? So
there's a lot of those downtown now, too.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a way to enforce versus the old meter where they look. So it actually saves a lot of time and it improves some of the accuracy in terms of the parking enforcement regulations. So from that standpoint, if we use license plate scanning as a rationale, that can be an impediment to doing this. But I think for the most part, where we can see some of the success in this is converting some of these parallel spaces in a downtown to an angle parking, taking it one step further with back-in angle parking. It's just going to be a lot safer. And I think there's ways around the license plate scanning issue, particularly if we're just talking about a number of spaces in an area.
We got a message from Aaron Rose on Facebook in response to our request for comments on this, saying when you are backing out of a space, you have less visibility on the cars around you than when you are backing into a space. Most electric cars also require you to back into spaces for charging. So that's kind of an interesting observation. There are charging ports, for instance, on Teslas on the rear of the vehicle. A lot of electric vehicles, regardless, have them sort of where the gas cap would be. And so those cords may not reach far enough. You would essentially, if you want to plug in, you'd have to back in.
Yeah, exactly. And I think as we move more towards this type of vehicle as an option, I mean, I think especially the widespread adoption of EVs, larger vehicles, that kind of thing that require safety in terms of being able to exit or to charge, that I think you might see more of an institutionalization of this. And this is probably why the insurance and some of the, like AAA is starting to recommend to move into this direction just from the changing technology and the types of vehicles that were on the road today. And of course, a lot of even some of these EVs allow you to they automatically back out, they can see things. So there's a lot of technology that can help this maneuver as you back into a space.
Message from Ann on Instagram saying, where I come from, back in parking is reserved for shady people switching dummy plates to evade the law. Just saying. Um, Another message, though, and a few people have said that their preference is to pull in and through. So effectively leaving themselves in the same position when they're ready to depart, but not requiring them to back in. And of course, that requires two spaces being available. But I would guess that also comes with a measure of risk if somebody's whipping in from the other side. It's not also foolproof.
Yeah, no, exactly. In fact, some insurance providers will say if you have that opportunity, particularly when you have two 90-degree spaces, you can pull through. You certainly can pull out, but of course you do run the risk if a vehicle's coming. You could have a head-on collision. I mean, albeit I would imagine it's a very slow speed, but still there is a direction to say, however your car is parked, it's easier to pull out with greater visibility than it is to back out. I think that's kind of the fundamental, recommendation.
We've got a call from Rhonda in Jacksonville. Good morning, Rhonda. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. What we haven't discussed is if you have a large cart to unload into your trunk, you have to maneuver in between your car and the one next to you in order to get behind your car to access your trunk. And there's very limited space because there's probably a car behind you that has also backed in. So it does not leave much room at all for people that need to unload groceries or bulk items, say from Home Depot or Lowe's.
That's a really good observation, Rhonda. And Fred, it's almost the opposite of what you were saying when it comes to urban street parking, because in an urban setting, if you're doing angled back-in parking versus parallel parking, you're actually putting your trunk by the sidewalk, which also puts the exhaust by the sidewalk.
Yeah.
Not everybody loves that if you're talking about outdoor cafes, but it does make your trunk more accessible. And as you say, it sort of funnels people towards the sidewalk because the way the car doors open. But to Rhonda's point, if you're in a parking lot and you back in, you can't get your shopping cart behind your car, between your car and another car, and get that open and loaded.
Yeah, that's right. Particularly when these spaces, I mean, not every shopping center is designing larger, which we've seen the growth in the spaces too to accommodate the large vehicles, but a lot of the standard anymore is about a 9x18 space. But some of these where they try to pack in more spaces, they're much smaller. So to her point, you can't actually, get your groceries in and out or access your trunk is safe. It's really tight through there. So yeah, these are sort of these lowest common denominator issues that you kind of contend with. I say that some of this is just so emotional too. It's just sort of like, when we're driving, it's almost become this like intuitive behavior. We activate our system one brain. We're just kind of doing the thing. And when you have to force yourself to do like a back end maneuver, you're really much more conscious, you're slow, you're much more deliberate and intentional. And I think that's what drives people nuts. Is like, wait a second, just pull in. And then I have to wait. It's just an impatience thing.
Sure.
I think this is all just human behavior and how do we navigate change.
It can be stressful too.
Yeah.
I mean, there are people that will, and I think I had a relative that would go home rather than parallel park because it's just not a skill set that they had. But back-in parking or parallel parking can be stressful, especially I think I was sitting outside Chamblin's the other day and somebody was laying on the horn at somebody who's trying to do that very thing, back up and park, and it requires everybody to have a little patience, and it's kind of in short supply.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. I mean, we're so quick to being able to do whatever it is that we have to do, or particularly now too, we have this hyper like delivery culture that we're in. So that's the other thing. I mean, competing for the spaces that are valuable, or also like guys that are just going to pick up an order at DoorDash or Amazon, and so all of this stuff. So this delivery thing, which was not in our brains, or we weren't even thinking about this 20 years ago.
Right.
What's the impact of that in terms of competing for spaces? And so between just moving fast, we're impatient, this just kind of creates
And it's
this
more
scenario.
crowded.
It is. It's way more crowded. You're looking at somebody and you're like, why is it taking you this long to back in?
We've got a call from Tim in Orange Park. Good morning, Tim. Go ahead.
Good morning. Personally, I try to park as far away from everybody as I possibly can, and I've still had people back into me. But that being said, I backing in. I try to do it as much as I can, and my wife has a Mustang, and even though I park very far away from everybody else, inevitably a couple of big pickup trucks, and I like trucks, but they pull next to me, and now I can't see to pull out. So, I mean, it is a catch-22, so to speak, but personally, yeah, I'd say backing in is better. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I mean, I guess the best bet really is to park at the very back of the lot and hoof it if you don't want to
Yeah,
be, have blind spots, and if you want to be able to park.
that's right.
Yeah. Just briefly, do we know anything about demographics? I know that there have been some anecdotal studies about who favors back-in parking these days, whether it's, people more with work trucks or perhaps skews more male than female. Do you have any feeling about that at all?
I think well, you might think it skews a little bit with folks in larger vehicles, maybe a little bit older, just from a safety perspective as you're driving. It'd be a really interesting study to be able to determine what's the breakdown. I mean, this sounds like this could be the best cocktail conversation we could have. It's really interesting the amount of how this really strikes a chord with people. A lot
of passion about parking.
There is. I mean, I think we could take this in so many different directions. I think obviously just parking in general. It's like I often couch it as this some sort of, like in the United States, like an inalienable right that we have, that it's free, it's abundant, and it's really not free. I think I was reading something the other day, like parking takes up the amount of surface parking in the United States is equivalent to Rhode Island if you were to actually just put it all together.
Wow.
So it's really amazing how much we have and how much land is devoted to it. Or in other words, for every car in the United States, it would get its own 1,000-square-foot studio apartment, basically.
For every car that
Yeah,
there
for
is.
every car that there is.
It does seem worth noting, too, there are some events, especially if you're in a parking garage and you're going to a concert or a show or a festival, backing in makes a lot more sense because nobody lets you out once you're parked.
No,
and you're in a long line.
Yep.
All right. Well, a lot to talk about. Fred Jones, thanks so much for walking us through it. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Anytime. This was great.
All right. Up next, why is information about maternal deaths being kept under wraps? We talked to the reporter behind a new investigation. Welcome back. A committee created by the Florida Department of Health to track pregnancy-related deaths has been cloaked in secrecy since the state's 6-week abortion ban took effect. This comes at a time when other states with restrictive abortion policies have seen an increase in maternal mortality rates. Here to tell us about her investigation, we are joined by Kate Payne. She's the state government reporter at the Florida Trib. Kate, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So first of all, can you start by just telling us what is Florida's Maternal Mortality Review Committee? When was it created? Why was it created?
Sure. So Florida's Maternal Mortality Review Committee was created in 1996. And there's a similar committee in all 50 states. And these committees are made up of a panel of experts, doctors, nurses, midwives, statisticians, who are dedicated and empowered to analyze any death that has occurred in the state that's related to pregnancy or up to a year postpartum after a woman gives birth. And these committees have a long history in this country. Some of these committees date back 100 years because public health experts recognize that these deaths that are linked to pregnancy and childbirth really tell us a lot about public health more broadly, even beyond just these women who have died.
And so this committee, as you report, basically went dark. And this sort of coincided with the appointment of Florida Surgeon General Joseph Ladapo. He oversees the Department of Health. And you found that this committee essentially stopped making its information available. It really hadn't posted information that dated beyond 2020. Is that right?
That's right. When we started reporting on this, the last report that the committee had published was for deaths that occurred in 2020. And that report was published in 2022. So there is, some delay in the committee doing its work. And then after we started asking questions about this, asking about the status of the committee, why subsequent reports hadn't been released, the Department of Health quietly published 3 new annual reports for the years 2021, 2022, and 2023.
And in terms of your request to the Department of Health for this information, this committee, as you reported, wasn't publishing its information timely. It did eventually, in response to your inquiries, publish some of that information. But this is a deliberative body that makes recommendations. And in the state of Florida, there are certain guidelines that we have, certain expectations of bodies like this. Can you talk about how the Sunshine Law works in Florida, what we usually see when we're talking about bodies that are appointed by the government and handle some kind of business or recommendations for the government?
That's right. So in Florida, our public records laws, our open government laws, have for years been considered a gold standard in securing the public's right to access this public information and to be part of these decisions that are being made by government agencies in their name. And having access to these meetings, having access, timely access to what's going to be on the agenda so that the public can participate. What's notable about this committee, as you say, is I have not found any evidence that the meetings of this committee have been noticed ahead of time, that minutes have been released, nothing of that sort. And that really appears to stand in conflict with the state's open government laws. In speaking to public records and open government experts in the state, they told me they cannot think of an exemption in the law that would allow the Department of Health to keep this committee and its work outside of public view. I have an open a public records request open with the department and request with their media office, trying to get more clarity on that and asking for the department to tell us, point to the law that empowers the department to keep this work outside of public eye. I've not gotten a clear answer on that yet. I will note that unlike many other committees in the country, Florida's committee is not spelled out in state law or in state rules. It appears to be a creation, a product of the Department of Health. So because it's not spelled out in state law, not enshrined in state law, there's no exemption spelled out in state law either.
And we should note in Florida, because of the existence of sunshine laws and open records and open meetings laws, the expectation is of openness. The expectation is that something is public. And so that's the default posture. When we request public records as reporters, for instance, it must be released unless there is a specific statutory exemption that the agency can cite. Same for a meeting. If a meeting has a specific, or an agency or a committee, it isn't meeting in public, isn't noticing their meetings, or isn't keeping minutes, they have to have a legal excuse as to why not. Is that right?
That's my understanding. Yes.
Yeah.
And the state attorney general's office in guidance on similar bodies over the years has come to the conclusion that these kinds of deliberate bodies that are meeting at the behest of state agencies, that are issuing recommendations to state agencies, are understood to be that they have to comply with these open government laws, that they have to operate in the sunshine.
So Florida is not entirely unique in terms of its maternal mortality monitoring in the last few years. Your reporting has shown that there is some similarity in other states. Can you talk about where we're seeing either an increase in secrecy or a rollback in terms of the function of some of these committees monitoring maternal mortality in the last couple of years?
Yeah, we have seen that in some other states that have restricted abortion, like Florida, that these maternal mortality review committees have come under political pressure. The state of Texas, their state officials have explicitly prohibited their maternal mortality review committee from analyzing abortion-related deaths, and that came in the wake of some reporting by ProPublica identifying preventable deaths that were linked to delays in care related to the abortion ban there. The state of Idaho has also, the committee there has come under political pressure as well. That state also has restricted abortion. And Idaho, a few years ago, became the first state to disband its maternal mortality review committee. That has been reinstated at this point. But that committee came under fire after members of the committee identified disparities in mortality rates for women who are on Medicaid. And after the committee recommended the state expand Medicaid coverage to try and prevent those deaths, the committee was disbanded.
For committees like this, what do we know about connections between maternal health, maternal mortality, and abortion? What research has been done? What has it shown?
So researchers have found that abortion restrictions are associated with parallel increases in maternal mortality, and that's across a number of different causes, including homicide, which people may be surprised to learn. And part of what's driving those parallel increases is that research shows that it is simply riskier to continue a pregnancy. It carries a greater risk of death than an abortion does. So it follows that as more women are carrying their pregnancies to term, that there will be more deaths as a result, unfortunately.
And not necessarily just maternal deaths, is that right? I mean, there is certainly some research into what it means for the fetus carried to term in terms of its own viability.
Yeah, there has been some research, I believe in Texas again, finding that infant mortality rates have also increased in the wake of these restrictions to abortion. So there are any number of impacts that we're seeing. And that's why it's so important for public health experts, for the public to have access to this information, these findings of these committees, so that we can understand better the impacts of state laws and state policies on public health.
Talk a little bit more about that in terms of who uses this information and to what end. This is data that hasn't been available. Is it the kind of thing that people have been noticing or concerned about prior to your reporting? Can you give us a little window, I guess, into how you started down this path, and then what the information has traditionally been used for?
Sure. So again, Florida's committee has been in operation for 2 decades, and over that time, they've made any number of recommendations with some pretty specific findings as well. I'll say the data, the specific cases are de-identified to preserve the privacy of the patients, but through the reviews of these deaths and these cases, these experts are able to make specific recommendations about what are causing these deaths, including other deaths that are linked to pregnancy but are not maybe the traditional causes of death that we would think of. One being drug-related deaths. We've seen a really significant increase in pregnant and postpartum women in Florida dying of drug overdoses in recent years, and that's really critical public health information. And so the findings of this committee over the years have been used to really directly shape initiatives at hospitals across the state. So researchers at universities will take these findings, take these analyses, and then be able to shape and draft specific communications, specific programs to educate providers, to educate patients, and all grounded in this very important data so that we know year by year what are Florida's women and families facing and what needs to happen to prevent what overwhelmingly are preventable deaths.
And just to get some clarity, is the absence of that information something that you were hearing about as a reporter and sort of began looking into this, or were you just poking around to kind of see what information was available and realized that it was missing?
So I have seen some of the other reporting out of other states across the country where these committees have come under political pressure, and knowing that Florida had these abortion restrictions in place, that's what piqued my interest.
Okay.
What's happening in the state of Florida. And additionally, Florida historically had been a state where women across the country would come to receive an abortion if their home state had restricted it. So Florida really, until state lawmakers restricted this access to this healthcare, had been a significant provider of these procedures. So I wanted to know what that impact was.
And we should, just for clarity, Florida had a 15-week abortion ban in 2022, and that tightened to 6 weeks in 2024. That came after the Dobbs ruling by the Supreme Court. And essentially, 6 weeks is often before most people know they're pregnant. So that's why people sometimes refer to it as kind of an effective abortion ban in many cases. In terms of the information you did get that ultimately was posted, I believe you found it was somewhat attenuated compared to previous years, the amount of information or what all was revealed. Can you talk a little bit about that?
That's right. So in this reporting, I reviewed a number of past reports dating back decades of this committee's work. And in past years, the recommendations of the committee alone would go for pages and pages of dozens of recommendations, some which really painted a picture of the situation that these women were in. One recommendation that sticks out was questioning, should we shackle women who are incarcerated and experiencing a health crisis while they're giving birth? Should they be shackled in a hospital? So that certainly paints a picture. The most recent reports that were released in the midst of our reporting, I would say, were significantly scaled back from previous years as far as the level of detail in the analysis, the level of detail in the recommendations. It struck me as much more of a broad brush, much watered down, compared to previous years.
Well, Kate Payne is a reporter with the Florida Trib. Her new report into this is available on the Florida Trib website. We also have a link to it on our website. Kate Payne, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, up next, when gruesome fairy tales inspire real-life murders, we'll tell you about a local production of the award-winning play The Pillow Man.
Wolfson Children's Hospital, where generations of families have found hope. Because it's here at Wolfson Children's where answers are found, odds are beaten, and comebacks begin every day. Wolfson Children's, always here. Visit wolfsonchildrens.com. Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. Accidents can happen when you least expect it. For decades, our attorneys have dug out the facts to help juries decide who's at fault.
More at terrellhoganlaw.com. Alchemy Yoga and Wellness, opening this summer in Ortega, offers a balanced approach to movement and recovery. Services include yoga, infrared sauna, cold plunge, massage, and facials in one location. More information at alchemyjacks.yoga.
Whether it's morning, noon, or night, Classical 24 on WJCT 89.9 HD2 is your classical music companion. The masters, the melodies, and the magic. 24 hours a day.
On the next Fresh Air, Oscar Isaac on Season 2 of Netflix's Beef, where he plays a country club manager whose polished exterior is hiding a crumbling marriage and a financial secret. He'll also go deep on his Golden Globe-nominated role as Victor Frankenstein and what playing a man with no constraints taught him about his own. Join us.
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
Former Homeland Security head Kristi Noem bought nearly a dozen large warehouses around the U.S. to turn into mega ICE detention centers. Now even deep red towns are pushing back on plans to construct these facilities in their backyards. It comes during heightened scrutiny as the death rate in these centers reaches a 22-year high. A look inside rapidly growing ICE detention centers, next time on 1A.
Today starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. The writer behind Oscar-nominated films Three Billboards and Banshees of Inisherin is also the author of a deeply dark comedy taking stage in Jacksonville. Here to tell us about their production of the psychological thriller The Pillow Man is its director, Joshua Andrews. Welcome, Joshua. Welcome back.
Hi, how are you?
We're also joined by Brian Neese, artistic director at Lumen Repertory Theater, where the play opens this weekend. Hi, Brian.
Yeah.
So this is an intense story, and I know that you guys say it's not for everyone. There are elements of graphic violence, disturbing imagery. Obviously, one of the subjects is child murders. So it is a challenging production.
It's a very pleasant story.
Very pleasant story, to put it mildly. Who is it for then, Joshua?
I think it's for people who enjoy the wrestle with really deep questions that shake them. Not just from the head, but down to the feet.
Mm-hmm.
I think at its core, there's so many sort of really challenging queries in it, namely being like art versus its consequences versus the life of the artist after his death or her death, these kinds of things. At its core, that's the main message of it, masked behind these very kind of gruesome and violent extremes. You know, I think Martin McDonagh uses the extremes to justify the intensity of the question, and that's kind of the shape of it.
Sure. Brian, 2025 was Lumen Rep's subversive season. This one has been labeled the challenging season. What are your plays challenging?
Well, status quo, truthfully, all of our plays do that. But this season, status quo, also challenging our notions of truth. What is truth? Who's responsible for the truth? What's the lifespan of truth? And this play in particular is challenging. Yes, it's challenging the audience. I mean, this is the first play we've done in our 4.5 seasons, 3.5 seasons. Mm-hmm. It just feels like 4.5. This is the first play we've done where we have content warnings. Okay. So that lets you know it's going to challenge the audience, but it challenges the artist too, because at the surface, you could play this production at the surface and the imagery and not go deeper into the questions. Mm-hmm. And for artists to realize the point of this is about these questions. So I'm going to not tell the audience what to think. I'm going to let them see me wrestle with the question as well. It's very challenging as an artist.
This play, just plot-wise, it takes place in a totalitarian state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's about an author, as you mentioned, and he's being interrogated by police because of a resemblance between his children's stories, mm-hmm. essentially, and some real-life crimes that are happening.
Correct. Yeah, correct. That's exactly it. And therein lies that sort of question, the state, as it were, controlling this city, this town, this world that we're in, the world we've built, and the dystopia, and then his ability to be an artist, given the nature of his stories. Sure, that aside, like his ability to be an artist in spite of the circumstances he's in.
You know, I remember Columbine. This ages me, but I remember the question coming up: are my video games responsible for what I'm reading on the news as a young adult? You know, we tend to point fingers at so it's easy to point finger at the artist and be like, your stories are the reason this. But behind that, these are real people. even though this is a fiction, it individualizes these people, and we find a sibling relationship embedded in all of this that complicates matters, and that they have a story that feeds their reality, means that maybe we're just responsible for each other in ways that we haven't really investigated because it's uncomfortable to be responsible for someone else.
The character of the Pillow Man is a character in one of this author's books. Is that right? And so that is kind of, the name of the book. This has been a really acclaimed play. It had done well on Broadway. It's been performed on the West End. I think we mentioned it's an Olivier Award-winning production.
David Tennant's been in a production. Jeff Goldblum's been in a production.
Yeah, and so it has been, a big success. This author has sometimes been noted for what I've seen compared to Guinness Black comedy. That he's obviously plays or movies like Banshees took place in Ireland and has this sort of subtext of war and everything that's happening. But it is incredibly violent and also just really, really funny.
Yeah, and that's true for this play too. Buried inside all of the, sort of gruesome details of some of the stories you're hearing and happening during the play is really good comedy. If it's played right. Hopefully we have it dialed in correctly, but if it's played right, it should be so subtle that it shocks you. The subtlety of the comedy, and
hopefully the audience finds themselves laughing and then realizing, did I just laugh at that?
Did I just laugh at that?
I think it's okay to laugh.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's an intimate setting. It is in WJCT Studio B, which is just down the hall from us here. And as always, Lumen Rep does a pay what you can preview event, which is trying to get younger people, students involved. And that's Thursday. And then it runs April 24th through May 9th. Is that right?
That's right.
Well, it is a bold theater, as always. Thanks, you guys, for bringing it to us. We appreciate it. It's nice to talk to you. Joshua Andrews, Brian Neese, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Thank you for listening. Thanks to everybody who called and wrote in. First Coast Connect is produced by Stacey Bennett. Our associate producer is Isabella Casapow. Our show is directed by Brady Corum, and our theme music is performed by Club de Belugas. Join us tomorrow when we sit down with the mayor's former Hispanic outreach coordinator after her departure from City Hall to find out about what's next. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Tidbits, family owned and operated since 1985. 4 locations: Bay Meadows, Hendricks, Mandarin, and now Fleming Island. Menu items include fresh sandwiches, salads, and soups. Open Monday through Saturday. Online ordering and menu at clarastidbits.com.